Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a progressive campaign agency that specialises in campaigning and community organising. We work with non-profit and community-based organisations, trade unions, progressive businesses and social democratic parties across the globe. Dunn Street develops community engagement and organising strategies to win campaigns both big and small. We train engagement staff, volunteers and organisers in leadership and power building, and we help leaders craft their own public narrative that tells a story that unites people and moves them to act together. And if you want to create change in your community in 2023, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. Today's episode is also brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn have the experience you need on your side when something goes wrong. They know the law inside and out, and will explain every detail without legal jargon so you feel comfortable and fully understand your situation. They know how the system works and have the expertise and resources to continue standing up for clients on matters where others might give up. Find out more on their website by visiting mauriceblackburn.com.au. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by SwiftFox. Every moment on your campaign matters. You need the tools that you can trust, lists that are up to date, phone banks that can change minds, emails that drive donations, events that will energize the community online and offline, and text blasts that distill your message perfectly. SwiftFox CRM is made for campaigners by campaigners. And to find out more, simply go to swiftfoxcrm.com to win your next campaign. Hello, and welcome to Season 5 of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast that's out every Friday that dives into the progressive campaigns of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And home we begin. And why not kick off the first episode of 2023 with a bloke that proved all the pundits wrong on Saturday, the 26th of November 2022, when he and his Victorian Labor government were returned to office for a third term with a whopping 56-seat majority, increasing their majority from the previous election by 1 seat, a remarkable achievement. So Premier Daniel Andrews is on the show today to reflect on not just the past 4 years of the Andrews Labor government, but in particular was to get his thoughts on the actual election campaign itself, which was, I think we can all agree, a very unorthodox campaign, to say the least. So it's great to have the Premier back on Socially Democratic for a bit of a chat about politics, campaigning, and the direction of our great state and where it's going to go under his leadership for the next 4 years. Also, while I've got you, Socially Democratic in 2023 promises to be a huge year for our little known podcast. Aside from our regular guests and episodes that we'll have across the 12 months, we're planning a series of episodes to unpack the New South Wales state election, just like we did for the federal and Victorian elections last year. We're going to have a series of episodes leading up to the election, which is on this last Saturday, I think it's the 25th of March this year. We're also going to do the same for the New Zealand general election, which is going to be, that hasn't been called yet, but will happen most likely in the second half of this year. Plus, we have a referendum on the Voice to Parliament. We'll also be running a series of podcasts leading up to that all-important referendum later in the year. So there's a couple of big ballots that are happening in our neck of the woods, and primarily this is a campaigning and organising podcast, so we're going to get those folks on to really unpack that and give you the information that you need so you can be fully informed and go out there and talk to your neighbours and your friends and your family about why they should continue to support progressive centre-left campaigns and governments. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher or whatever podcast app you're using. And if you like the show, please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. And when you're done listening to today's episode, leave us a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser. And for all the updates for every episode, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Okay, that's a really long intro. Let's get to today's episode. We are taking this one on a Wednesday afternoon on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. It's our first recorded episode for the new year, and what better way to kick off season 5 of your favourite left-wing political campaigns and organising podcast, and having the former Assistant Secretary of the Victorian branch of the Labor Party on the show. Daniel Andrews, welcome back to Social Democratic.
It's very good to be with you, Stephen.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
And the same to you.
Did you manage to get a break over the festive season?
I did, actually. A few days off. We had most of the outlaws were over for Christmas. I think we fed 25 people or something like that. It was terrific. It was good fun. Weather was good and lots of nice food and a few nice things to drink. It was good.
I can't imagine 2022 presented many opportunities for you to get out and have a hit. How's the golf handicap looking right now? I didn't play between my birthday in July. I had a game that week, and I didn't play until after the election. So it was a long absence. But I've had a few games since, and it's good. It's fantastic to be back out. As I said, the weather's been good, so it's been nice to get up early. First off, out at just before dawn. It's terrific. It's been over 7 weeks since you and your Labor government were re-elected for another 4 years. Have you managed to stop and reflect on the campaign and the outcome?
Yeah, a little bit. Obviously, to get that 56th seat, to get one more than we started with, we've obviously had Parliament sit, so we've welcomed all the new members and all those who got back in really tight seats. A couple of first speeches, all the kind of pomp and ceremony of that first day's backers. Yeah, I think it's given us, all of us, that opportunity just to think a little bit about what we've all been able to achieve as a team. And, it's a deeply humbling thing to be re-elected for another 4 years and to do it in such emphatic style. When this was a different campaign to any that I've been involved in, there was a nastiness, an edge to this that was, I don't think, politics at its best. There was something less than that. And in many respects, an election, not just from a tonal point of view, but with first election straight after a 1 in 100 year event, there was a bit of uncertainty, a little bit of, I won't say doubt, but there's always some uncertainty when it comes to an election campaign because, it's the day of reckoning. It's when people get to pass their judgment on you, and the preceding couple of years had been like nothing else any of us had ever been through. So, yeah. We're obviously proud, but at the same time, we're very focused because we've got, I think one of the reasons that we're back is because we've had that sense of urgency, and we've pushed that right throughout the public service, right throughout our whole team. So a little bit of a break over summer, but there's already been a lot of hard work going into laying out the beginnings of a 4-year plan, and already your listeners may or may not be surprised to know, work's already started on delivering election commitments. Work's already started on setting up new departments, new cabinet committees, budget, which will be in May. All that stuff starts pretty much the day after. I know that sounds a bit cliched, and everyone thinks that you're talking shit when you say that. You don't really. You get straight back into it. But then once you've done that initial work, then a little bit of time off is good, just to kind of recharge.
You mentioned in those remarks there about what type of campaign it was, and even in my own memory and in my 20-odd years of doing political campaigns, I don't ever recall a campaign as crazy as this. We had conspiracy theories on the front page of all the majors, ridiculous non-scientific exit polls in air quotes conducted by inexperienced candidates at polling booths with samples of 159, and evidently that was good enough to get a run in the papers. Members of Parliament threatening violence towards fellow parliamentarians. It was... And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much
there's a
else.
fair bit more.
There was so much happened. How did we get to, where were the seeds of this campaign in the fact, why was it so crazy? What's your take on that?
Well, someone the other day, I saw someone in a social setting, and they didn't have a go, but they sort of made a comment, and I sort of let it go, just campaign's over, I'm not here to argue with people, and again, I don't think this person was going to be persuaded no matter what I said. And I was with somebody else, and they said they passed a comment to me about this person, and I said, look, at the end of the day, you always have to remember, we did lock people down for like 2 years. We were in people's lives in an unprecedented way. There was a lot of pain, there was tragedy as well, but for the best of reasons, we made principled decisions. We did the right thing, not the popular thing, and people have views on that. People have views on that, and some people are very supportive, some people aren't. People are entitled to those views. So I just wish that our politics was practiced the same way that little interaction was. You've got a view. I didn't have a go at her for the view she had. She didn't really have a go at me, but she made it pretty clear that she was not impressed with some of the decisions we'd made. That's civilised. But this notion of no settled truth, so you make up your own facts, you don't have a set of known knowns and certains that everyone can plan around. Like, how do you have a debate with someone who just makes stuff up? Like, it's really hard. It's really, really hard. In fact, it's not something you should do. You should avoid that at all costs because it just drags you down to their level. I think the other thing too is that, even 2018, we got 57+% of the two-party preferred vote. Yeah, so more than 4 in 10 people did not vote for us. So even in a big win, there's always going to be a section of the community who are not fans. I think that the way we had to govern and the interventionist, that involvement in people's lives, the unprecedented stuff that we had to do, and some ugly stuff, and the fact that some of that discontent was people tried to weaponise that, maybe gave some people permission to go to places, to adopt a tone, to say things, to get to do deals with people that, had a kind of ugliness to it. It had an anger to it. What's really pleasing, and this is not self-praise, it's just pleasing that those angry people were so comprehensively outnumbered by people that are much more hopeful, much more optimistic, much smarter, much more realistic too. This was not a period to do the popular thing. Politics had to be suspended. And if you look at some parts of the world where politics was not suspended, they did not have outcomes anywhere near as good as ours. Acknowledging, of course, that not every outcome was good, and there was a lot of pain and a lot of damage, and we have to repair that, of course. No one's kind of glossing over that. But there's issues about emotion, anger, pain, all of that. That's all real. Then there's people who try and weaponise that and try and turn that into their own political advantage. Then there's people who, frankly, have no place describing themselves as the alternative government. When you go and do preference deals with everyone, even those who have, on any measure, extreme views, whether it be in terms of multiculturalism, anti-Semitism, racism, no support of science or facts or civilised debate. When you say put Labor last and you go and do deals, you're in a political partnership with a whole lot of other people who, as I said, could not be called mainstream. Combine all of that together, Stephen, I think you've got more heat for good and bad reasons, for understandable as well as inexcusable reasons. And then when you've got a media who, frankly, forgot that their job is to report the contest, not to try and determine the winner of it, add all that together and you finish up with a campaign that, at least in part, had some very strange elements and indeed some ugly elements. But the pleasing thing, the thing that, as a Victorian, not as a Labor Party person, not as the winner of this election, just as a Victorian, the really pleasing thing is that the vast majority of Victorians didn't buy into that. They knew that we had to make very difficult decisions. We had to do some extraordinary things. We didn't choose to be in power in the midst of a 1 in 100 year event, because that's the thing. You don't get to choose the challenges you face. You can choose how to face them, but you don't get to choose what will come at you. That's what leadership's all about. I've given this quite a lot of thought, and we could talk for hours on this, on these sorts of issues. But in many respects, the more productive thing is to focus on the positive, and that is, as I said, the vast majority of people didn't buy into that, because as a Victorian community, we are kind and generous and thoughtful, and our better selves know and understand that sometimes leadership is all about doing what is right, not doing what is popular.
Can I dig in on that actually? Because I think it's an interesting point. There was a lot of commentary in the lead up to the election in the media that you would be a drag on the ticket. Sections of the media argued that that you weren't liked by the public.
Yes, I did see some of that. Yeah.
Marshall Gantz, the Harvard academic and community organiser, talks about public leadership as it's about being respected, not being liked. And one of the only journalists I think I noticed sort of picked up on that nuance was Ralph Epstein of the ABC. I want to get a sense from you in terms of your public leadership. What does that mean to you? How do you seek to lead? You've been in the job now for a while. What guides your actions as a leader?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get asked this question a lot, and I don't have a kind of neat and tidy answer because I don't give it a lot of thought. You just do it. You do what comes naturally to you. You've got a job to do. You're going to do it. Try and do it well. Try and be true to your values. Try and be true to yourself. Never ever bullshit people. Don't pretend to be something you're not because people pick it and they won't follow something that isn't real. So whether it's in fire or in flood more recently or in a 1 in 100 year pandemic event, you've got to be true to yourself. And I remember I sat down with Kath very early on, and when it was clear that we were going to have to do lockdowns and all manner of curfews and a book full of rules, and we were going to have to be in people's lives like never before. I said, look, we've won 2 of these, but there may not be a third. This is going to be deeply, deeply unpopular. And we had not a long conversation, we didn't need to. And she said, well, you've got to do what's right. You've got to do what's right. Because at the end of the day, you can do the... If your politics is about you, not about the people you serve, then you make the easy choice. Well, I'm not going to do the hard thing. I'm going to do the popular thing. People love this. We're going to go our own way. Everyone else is going to lock down. We aren't. Everyone's going to have rules. We won't. Yeah, and that's great. That's popular for about 5 minutes until literally tens of thousands of people die. And then you will be judged, as you should be. That's not the job. The job is not to be popular. The job is to do what's right. So what guides me, it's not, there's no book, there's no manual, there's no, there's no how-to. You've got to have an instinctive sense of the role and responsibility you have, the privilege, the honour, but you've got to also know that with opportunity comes a profound obligation. And as I said on election night, Paul Keating, who is a very good friend of mine, someone I talk to often, someone I ring up and listen to, because that's the way those conversations go. And I mean that's a compliment, because he has a lot to say, many views on many different things. And I think one of the most profound reformers that our country's ever known. He did say to me a long time ago, it's not about, leadership is not about being popular, it's about doing what's right. And I don't know, in times of crisis, I'm blessed in that I seem to be able to have clarity. I seem to be, and it is a blessing. And again, self-praise and self-commentary is not something I do a lot of, but I tend to kind of instinctively know, righto, we're going to have to do that. That's the way it's going. And then you've got to bring people with you, of course, or at least try to. But, you don't go to leadership school. And the thing is this, you've either got some of these qualities, and no one's perfect far from it, but you've either got a sense of this, and people see that. So it all gets back to, and that's how you find yourself in a leadership position, because people work you out. For me, if you want it for the right reason, if you want it for the people that you're there to serve, if you want it for them rather than for yourself, people spot that and they'll vote for it. That's kind of, as I said, I don't have a neat answer. But I'm blessed in that quite often, not always, but quite often when there's big things to be done, I've got in my own mind at least a clarity about what should happen. And some people would criticise that. Some people would say, oh, well, you're a bit too certain sometimes. But I think that's far preferable than being all over the shop and not really having a sense of what who you are, what you're about, and what the circumstances demand of you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does actually. And my follow-up question, which I've just
I have to tell you, I'm quite pleased that I don't have a neat and tidy answer on that, because I think if you had some formulaic thing, slogans, that's not real. What's real is, you get this job, you take it very seriously, you know and understand the decisions you make have impacts, you weigh them up, but you always try and do what's about them, not about you. And how you're viewed, well, that's a different issue. But if you're just about yourself and about whether people love you or hate you, no one will ever respect that sort of leader. So maybe after that long, convoluted answer, I've got back to the point of the question. Being respected is important. Being regarded in some ways, that is, people having a sense of who you are and what you're about, and whether they love it or not. If they've got that sense of certainty about why you're doing it and who you are and what your politics is, then I think you can be better in these jobs than you otherwise would be.
I had a podcast interview in the middle of at some point last year with former party secretary David Feeney and former party secretary Eric Locke. And we're talking about you and your leadership, and we're just broadly speaking about leadership in general. Eric made the observation, some leaders, when there is a crisis, they literally run away from it. Great example, Matthew Guy was literally caught running out the back of Parliament House to avoid the media during one of the crises that confronted him and his leadership and his party. Eric said, however, Daniel is unique because he runs to the crisis. Do you think of it, when you see issues blowing up, whether it be, okay, we obviously had the issue with Adam Somyurek and the factionalism stuff blow up during 2022. Obviously you had 2 years of lockdown, you've had floods, you've had bushfires, challenges that are presented. Your own thinking of leadership and how you deal with that. What is it? You talked about the thought process. What is the thought process there? Where do you say, right, how are we going to confront this? As opposed to what a lot of leaders do, which is piss off and disappear and think, I just don't want to deal with that.
Well, they don't remain leaders for very long, and they don't lead very well because, in my judgment, leadership is about being as authentic as you can be, being as real and constant and certain as you possibly can be, trying to bring, if you've got that gift of clarity, or if you don't, surround yourself with people who do, like have a plan, stick to that plan. Execute. That's what's really, really important.
Where'd you learn that?
Well, we were brought up to not to be sure of ourselves, because that doesn't get you very far either. But as kids, and our family, we had a code. It's a very Catholic thing. That it's about more than just you. That you're part of something bigger. That you should give back. That if you're fortunate, then you have to do good things for other people. Not in a kind of cliched charity sense of things. Nothing wrong with charity, but I don't mean it that way is the point I'm making. It's more about if you've had opportunity, then you have a profound obligation to do things that matter, to try and be impactful. And that happens in lots of different ways. Sometimes that's in organised politics. Sometimes that's people who become incredibly well known. And other times it's silent, quiet. No one will ever hear about it, but it matters. That's a deeply personal thing. That's what we were brought up to know, not to believe, to know. Like that's just what a good person does. You've just got to be clear about what you're doing, why. Embrace the fact that there's no perfect option. Be honest with people. Talk up to people. People are a good deal smarter than what many people in organised politics give them credit for. So everything's dumbed down. Everything's, well, what can I get away with today? Like, what's the minimum I can share? What's the smallest part of myself, my persona, my psyche, my intellect that I can share with people? That's not leadership. That's, I don't know, kind of showmanship. It's kind of, it's fake, and people spot it, and they won't follow it in good times, let alone in bad times. People want facts. They want science. They want logic. They want principle, they want clarity and certainty, and they want someone who isn't making it up. They want someone who's being real. And that's what I try to do. Whether I succeed in that is a matter for others to judge. But, I don't run towards the crisis because that kind of denotes that I'm somehow trying to gain an advantage from the misfortune of others. But you don't get to pick the challenges you face. You have to face them, and you have to face them head on. That's what leadership's about.
If the level crossing removal program defined the election campaign offering from Labor in 2014 and our successful election there, and the suburban rail loop defined the 2018 one, and feel free to push back on that if you don't think that was the case, that's my take. What was the policy offerings that you think defined Labor's campaign in 2022?
I think, and I don't want to just do the lines, although there are a number of sort of key points throughout the campaign, and they were there for a reason, because they're good policy, they're a particularly Victorian way of doing things. There's reform as well as real common sense practicality for people's lives. I think at a time when cost of living is a really significant issue, I think making kinder free really struck a chord with people, not just for the money it saves people, which is not an insubstantial amount of money, $2,500 per child per year. That's a lot of money. Well, you've got to go and earn $4,000 or $5,000 to net that off. So that's a lot of hard work. But also female economic power, more and more women being able to, if they choose to, come into the workforce, work more hours. Childcare's not working for working people. So play-based learning is much better than childcare. Make that free, get the numbers right up, have it universally available. It's more than just cargo, it's more than just cash. There's a big policy imperative here too. Female economic power, female participation, brain development, socialisation, life skills. Like this on every level, this is really good. It works. Costs a lot, but it's a profound investment. We've been having a big debate. Oh, sorry, we did for a bit, and then it's waned off to other things have taken its place. But we had a bit of a debate not long after the change of federal government about, we've got to have. Well, sorry, actually, to a certain extent, we've had a big debate over a long period of time about what's the best migration level, particularly skilled migration. 195,000 is the number we've settled on. That clearly needs to go up, particularly in this post-COVID world.
For the state of Victoria?
Across the whole...
Or across the country?
Across the whole nation. We should welcome that. Well, that's a proper and important debate to have. Getting people with the skills that we need here, not as visitors, but to build a new life, together with a really strong onshore training, TAFE system, skills, higher education system. So we're not just importing, we're also making sure that we're looking after people here too. But in many respects, the more important debate is to use the underutilised resource that's here right now. And we're talking about tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of women across Australia who would like to work more hours or study or just have more balance in their life, if only some of the barriers to looking after our smallest citizens could be removed, whether it's cost, whether it's being close to home, all of those things. Great for kids, great for not only women, but particularly women, great for the Victorian economy, great for the national economy, just as important from a participation point of view as getting a skilled migration number that's higher, for instance. I'll just use that as one example. So that was big. Cost of living again, when you think about free TAFE training, jobs start with skills, everyone should have that pathway, there should be no barrier. That was big because we added to that. That's been there for our whole 8 years, but we added to that as part of this campaign. And again, on cost of living, given it was such a central issue, bringing back the SEC. So finally someone standing up and saying privatisation of our electricity assets has not worked. It has hampered the transition to clean energy. It has seen obscene profits made all the way along against a promise of lower prices. It's seen massive job losses amid promises that, no, your job is safe. This is not a luxury. This is an absolute necessity. It's a basic. No electricity means no economy, and no electricity means, a very different standard of living. We would never let our water be sold off, and our electricity is no less intrinsic to the lives that we lead, the economy that we are all part of. So doing something about that, as well as doing something to end this continuous admiration of the problem, this tortuous process of climate wars and indecision and inaction, say, no, these coal-fired power stations are leaving, they've told us they're going, they've made their money, they're going, righto, we're going to replace it with publicly owned, 100% renewable, we're just going to get this done. There's three things. I think there are many other things, more nurses, better hospitals, jobs, all manner of different infrastructure projects and promises, but also less specifically in a broader sense, just that sense that we've achieved a lot in the last 8 years, but a lot of it isn't finished yet. And why would you risk the other side, who were, let's not forget, were promising to audit, which is just a fancy liberal way of saying cut, all the big build, all of our big infrastructure projects. So that's very real for people. That's tens of thousands of jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs, really. So I think all those things were big. Whether there was a defining feature, I don't know that there was a defining feature. I did read something the other day that the other side thought I was the defining feature, and they should make the whole thing a contest of leadership, and so much so that I'll vividly and forever remember doing live crosses. So I've got a earpiece in and looking down a camera and talking to a journalist in a studio. This is in the backyard of my house on the night before and on the morning of election day. And I did my thing, and then he gets to do his. And I'm not clear yet. They haven't said you're clear. You can take the earpiece out and step off and do the next one. So I'm listening to him. So I've just done a pitch about free Kinder, free TAFE, bring back the SEC. If you don't like your power company, vote Labor. Let's do something about it. Relatively positive agenda. And they go to him, and it's vote him out. Don't wake up with the Dan Andrews hangover. Just this hatred, this an almost obsession. I'd mentioned the guy the whole campaign, and I'm being a bit indulgent by my own standards in mentioning him now.
You still haven't, actually.
Well, at the end of the day, they wanted a contest of leadership, and I did see some commentary the other day that maybe that's exactly what they got. That's not for me to judge. That's for others to judge. I'm just myself. I just do it the way I think it should be done. And people vote for it. I'm deeply grateful to them. Not just for the win. In fact, not for the win at all, really. I'm deeply grateful because what they've done is they've given me the greatest gift so I can keep doing things. I can keep doing this job. Not for myself, but for them. If you did it for yourself, well, would you do this for yourself? Seriously. Like, I've got a title, I've got a job, but my kids are just as involved. They didn't choose to be, but they are. Kat's just as involved, as we saw back to your earlier question about conspiracy theories and media and all this sort of stuff. Like, if you weren't doing this properly, if you weren't doing it for the best of reasons, I don't know. I wouldn't be doing it. I'd go and do something else. I'd seriously go and do something else.
I found it fascinating during the campaign talking about what our opponents were pitching to the electorate. One of them was trying to frame the suburban rail loop as a negative issue in the campaign, when certainly I think that one of the many reasons why Labor won a lot of seats in the eastern suburbs in the 2018 campaign was because of the suburban rail loop. I thought it was a positive boon.
And we picked up seats along that corridor.
Yeah, and
very, very
they were trying to
of.
frame it in this campaign as a negative. And I just thought to myself, I thought, am I missing something here? Like, I haven't been out in the eastern suburbs for a while. Maybe something's going on out there that they're like, it's a waste of money. But clearly, obviously what we saw, and I'll talk more about the eastern suburbs in a moment, but clearly that was a mistake. And also health. They really wanted to campaign strongly, particularly at the start of the campaign, on health, which has always been a strong suit for Labor. Just thinking back during the campaign itself, did that throw you a bit? Were you a bit surprised by the way that they were running that type of campaign?
I couldn't work out why they were running on health. They couldn't get a nurse or a doctor or an AMBO to stand with them, ever. They did a procession of announcements, most of which were not very well thought through, out the front of hospitals. And they never went in, never had any workforce. The buildings don't treat people like health workers, nurses, AMBOs. They treat people. And if they won't stand with you, well then why should anybody choose you? Seriously. You are not the answer. If the very people who run our health system and deliver health care think so little of you, because they remember your record, that they won't stand with you, well then why would any Victorian support that? The other thing too is they want to have it both ways. Oh, Labor's caused a health crisis. Righto. Just completely airbrushing out a 1 in 100 year pandemic event. And then we would stand up and say, or I'd stand with Dominic Perrottet, and he would say, when the question came from the journo, he'd say, no, things are just as bad. They might even be worse in New South Wales. Every health system across the country is struggling. Every health system across the world is struggling. So I don't think people can latch onto that because it just doesn't make any sense. But the other thing too, worst of all, is so health's in a bad place. The pandemic had nothing to do with it. That's just factually wrong. And by the way, you should vote him out because of his pandemic response. So is it about the pandemic or not about the pandemic? Did the pandemic happen or did it not happen? Like, you can't bullshit people into thinking you've got a plan if you don't have a plan. So they were a classic opposition. Oh, hospitals aren't going so well, let's jump on that. Let's blame him and the government for that. No, the pandemic is the issue. Oh, no, we won't be honest about that. Like, no one's, it's a mile wide and an inch deep, right? All of it. We're going to have $2 public transport fares. Yeah, but you're not going to buy any new trains, are you? You're not going to build, and if you do, you're not going to build them here. You're not going to, we're going to extend a whole lot of tracks, well, like the half a dozen projects that you committed to in 2010 and didn't deliver one of them. It was odd. It was a very odd policy offering. To your question, though, in relation to the suburban rail loop, people know we're going to be the biggest city in our nation quite soon, and our suburbs will be choked with traffic if we don't have world-class public transport. Creates a lot of jobs. It's a big project. Of course it's a big project. Yes, you have to borrow to build it, because why should taxpayers today pay 100% of the price for something that will take decades to build and will be of benefit to generation after generation after generation? Doesn't make any sense. And yes, it costs a lot because there's a lot of benefit comes from it. And if it was easy and cheap, it would have been done by somebody else decades ago. It wasn't. Imagine Melbourne today without the city loop. That cost a lot. That was a controversial project. No one thanks you for the things you don't do, the things you don't build. And no one in 20 or 30 years will look back and go, gee, I wish they'd done that, because we will have done it. We will actually have built it. So, yeah, I couldn't make sense of that one. Neither could voters, it would seem, as we picked up seats right along that suburban rail link.
Let's take a quick break to talk about SwiftFox. Every moment on a campaign matters. You need the tools that you can trust. Lists that are up to date, absolutely. Phone banks that can change minds. Emails that drive donations, and events that will energise the community online and offline. And text blasts that distill your message perfectly. SwiftFox CRM is made for campaigners by campaigners. And to find out more, go to swiftfoxcrm.com to win your next campaign. Okay, let's get back to the show. Turning to election night itself, going to the count, what was your mood or expectations on election night? As 6 o'clock polls close, how are you feeling?
Election day was a long day because it kind of gets in your head a bit, like, you know, some of that wacky stuff you talked about at the start. You know, there was elements of ugly, elements of, to that point. So a bunch of people who probably had never voted Labor were a bit emboldened. Know that you could get heckled, or someone might tell you what they thought of you a bit more easily, a bit more freely than they might otherwise have done. That was certainly my sense of it. But when someone comes up and calls you a communist, like, I don't think they were ever voting for me. Not in 18, not in 14, never, right? I think there was a factor where people, because of what we'd all been through, and again, I'm not critical of this, people perhaps they're a little bit more entrenched. And some people who had never been big fans were a little bit emboldened and felt not just that they could, but that they needed to. And that's fine. As I said before, we did lock people down for a long time, and we were in people's lives in unprecedented ways. I'm not critical of that. It should just be as best you can. It should be civilised and as respectful as possible. So it does get in your head a bit. And the other thing too, like, there's some of the polling stuff, like, honestly. Like, some people poll to know, and some people poll to show. And the stuff in the media, so-called pollsters, oh yes, it's 54%, but it's going to be a minority government. Well, how does that make sense? It just doesn't make sense. So it was that kind of hope over experience. This is what we want to happen. This is the outcome that we want. We want a contest. We want this kind of reckoning. We want him to do badly. We want them to do badly. No real evidence that was going to happen at any point. All the polling, multiple different sources, even the stuff that was used to try and talk down a majority government, when you looked at the actual numbers of it, it didn't make any sense. However, election day is always a long day because, literally you've done everything you can do. There's nothing else to do. You just have to wait. But it was sort of in my head a little bit, a little bit.
It was, to that point.
Because it's that kind of reckoning, righto? All the polling's good, but polling can be wrong. Well, has all of it ever been wrong? Oh, there are a few examples, not many, but there are a few examples. That wasn't what was causing me to be a bit anxious. It was more, well, it's always a bit of a nervous day. And then added to that, we've had to do some extraordinary things. What if there's a silent group out there that aren't in the numbers who, regardless of all the good things that we've done, and on any measure, we've got a lot of stuff done, they just think it's time for a change. Time for, we've got to put COVID and put him behind us. So yes, it was an anxious day. But what was clear is that the polling was right and that the vast majority, and that middle group, not people who are not extreme, people who are not rusted on one way or the other, but people who actually decide elections, they knew that we didn't invent COVID, we didn't create it, we're not to blame for it. We just responded as best we could, and we were true to ourselves and we were true to the people we serve. And that meant we had to do a whole lot of unpopular things. Plus, I think people are past it. They're over it. They don't want to look back. They want to look to the future. So what's your positive plan? And if you haven't got one, if your plan is vote him out, that's not a plan. That's politics about you. That's not politics about them. That's politics about your interests, not their interests. That's politics about your hatred rather than their hopes. And it doesn't work.
It's,
So long day, very bloody long day. But, we got an amazing result. We are humbled and proud and excited and, tired as well a bit, but, a little bit of a break and we're straight back into it. And, we've got some big challenges to face.
We'll get to those challenges in a moment. There's a bunch of things you just mentioned there, so I want to unpack now. So let's go back a couple of steps. The first one is, the story, I guess, in 2016 federal campaign was that the polling was off, and those who work in data were getting a hell of a time from the media saying, you got this wrong. In certainly this state election, the polling was accurate. If anything, it was a bit undercooked for Labor. It was a bit underrepresented of the Labor vote. It wasn't that the polling was wrong, it was the analysis of the polling that was absolutely way off. And just reading it over the course...
Some of it, yeah.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Oh, you're going to lose 15 seats, you're going to lose 20 seats. Now, look, there's always a bit of scuttlebutt goes back and forth, right, between different camps. I think that our opponents were absolutely certain that they were going to win.
But they were in 2018 as well. Do you remember when they released their polling and said?
And I'm not here to give them all the tips on how to be better at what they do. But I will. But if you just talk to yourself, if you're defined by the things you're opposed to, and if you really don't like me, and they really don't, and you surround yourself with other people who really don't like me and us, and they're kind of the only people you talk to, then of course you think you're going to win because everyone you talk to loves you and thinks you're terrific. But that's not campaigning. That's just hanging around with people who are already voting for you. Campaigns are about persuasion. You can't persuade people if you haven't got a good offering. And a good offering is defined by plans for them, not a strategy for you, a plan for the people you want to serve. This is not rocket science. And if you don't know this, then you don't win. You just don't.
On election night, do you watch the coverage? Where do you spend election night?
At home.
Yep. Do you watch the coverage? Or did you watch the coverage this year?
I flicked a little bit back and forth, but you're normally on multiple phones, getting all sorts of reports. And getting reports from scrutineers that are inside school halls actually counting votes. And that usually gives you a much more reliable sense of things.
Are you superstitious? Do you have any rituals or anything that you tend to do on election night?
I am a very superstitious person, actually, but not on that day, not have any particular ones.
Right.
Not any particular ones. But I sort of just go off on my own, and you don't want to be around too many people because it's a relatively anxious time. But you get a good trend, you get a good sense of things early, and we got some good stuff in early that was a little bit hard to analyse because the non-day vote, the pre-poll vote, had been so big that some of the numbers from the booze, so on the night stuff, was quite small. So there was a bit of a doubt, can you get accurate swing numbers out of this? There was a bit of uncertainty there. But that trend was very solid early, and then it panned out, it remained steady. Then there was, in the coverage, this is the other reason why you don't watch the coverage, is you then got all the other side who, it's not their job to concede, and I've been there, I was there in 2010, it's not your job to concede, right? So you've got to put the best spin on things, the best face on it. And then so we got this whole narrative started to develop for like what felt like 3 hours, probably because it was. All the pre-poll votes haven't been counted yet. So then you start, well, maybe there's something to that. And I kept going back to, I'd spoken to a lot of people all the way through, a lot of candidates and a lot of really experienced booth workers over the 2 weeks of pre-poll. And they universally had given me reasonably neutral to positive feedback. Doesn't feel quite like 18. It's a little bit different, but it's not 2010. There's not a lot of aggro. There's not a lot of, people are just pretty quiet. They're just going through. We had a lot of gauntlet running that had to be done too, because you had a lot of candidates in some seats and a lot of particularly aggressive people who were kind of up in voters' faces and stuff, certainly in my area. So that just meant people put their head down, took nothing or took everything and didn't want to show their hand, if you like. But they'd made up their mind and they voted for us.
One of the things I enjoyed about election night...
Or at least enough of them voted for us.
Yeah.
We did get some swings against us in a number of seats and we've got some work to do there.
We'll come to that.
Yeah.
One of the things I did enjoy about election night, and maybe you can explain it to me, is at 6 p.m, when the polls closed, sections of the media were praising Matthew Guy and the Liberals for running a strong campaign. But then by 9:30, when the results started to come through, it was clear that they weren't going to win. The reason why Labor when we got to 9:30, the results were clear that Labor was going to win. The Liberals apparently run a shit campaign now. And it wasn't because Labor had been a good government over the last 4 years. It was the Liberal Party ran a shit campaign. What happened in those 3.5 hour window that they went from running a great campaign to a terrible campaign?
Well, there are some people who find it incredibly difficult to provide any positive commentary toward Labor in any circumstance ever. No government's perfect. But, we live our values, we do what we say, we get things done. And there's a lot of people who are better off because of the decisions we've made and the work that we've done. Not everyone. And that's evidenced by the fact that, you can do extremely well and finish up with more seats than you started with. But there's a good number of people who didn't vote for us. And that's why on election night I made a point of saying, we'll govern for you too. Because that's the job. The job's not just to look after your mates and just to be concerned with people who agree with you. You've got to govern for everybody. So, and this is the thing, I've never campaigned just to people who agree with me and just to people who think I'm the greatest thing ever. That would be an error. And I certainly don't govern that way. That would be wrong. Our opponents seem obsessed with people who, it's just this sort of feedback loop. And it's also this Spring Street bubble too. Things that are really big on Spring Street and mean nothing on Main Street. That's why, I've got a good number of friends who've got nothing to do with politics. They're people that you've never heard of and you never will hear of them. They're not prominent people. They're just ordinary, hard-working, people who are not involved in politics. They're real. They're real people, civilians, you might call them. and that's what it comes from, living in your electorate. It comes from living in a school community, in a local neighbourhood, leading as best you can a relatively normal life, a real life. And you get amazing feedback from people. Lots of ideas, get a really acute understanding of what matters to them. Obviously they're friends, so they obviously don't think ill of me, or they wouldn't be friends. But they're not haters. They don't hate the Liberal Party. They're not, so partisan as to be biased and not a good judge, not a good barometer of what people are thinking and feeling and wanting and hoping for. I don't know. I just think that hate's not a great motivator. If all you want to do is beat the bloke you're up against, if you don't want the prize for you and what you'll do with it, people won't give it to you.
In the analysis after election night, the results out in the east were really fascinating, I thought. In 2018, obviously, when Labor won a swag of seats in the eastern suburbs, Burwood, Box Hill, Ashwood, Ringwood, Bayswater, the political orthodoxy is that they'll all go back to the Conservatives at the 2022 election. Interestingly enough...
Despite no polling that suggested that was going to happen.
Correct.
Like none.
And that burns my piss when people do that. When have we ever seen the Republican Party in the United States, when they take turf off the Democrats, say, we're going to lose that next time around? No, they dig in and try and hold it. We'll come back to that in a moment. The federal election in May was interesting because there was huge swings to Labor in those corresponding federal seats in those
Chisholm,
suburbs.
Casey, Deakin, Aston. But that never happened, apparently. Now, it's that central point. I want this person to be unpopular. I want this government to be removed. I want people to think very differently than they do. And I'll hang around with a bunch of people who agree with that and want the same things. And then I'll act all surprised when it doesn't happen.
And then obviously the story that night is Labor holds Bayswater, which is now a margin of 4.2%, Ashwood 6.2%, Box Hill 7.2%, Ringwood 7.5%, and also picked up Glen Waverley, adding to other gains.
My next door neighbour.
Yes.
All these things matter. I could have told you that before the election. I can certainly tell you that now. And the numbers all the way through bore that out. So the other thing too, you cannot look to any part of Melbourne, but particularly when you say to the east, go down to Box Hill and go and ask half a dozen people what they think of Pauline Hanson, what they think of racism. They know what that brand of politics means. It means their partners and their kids, and perhaps they themselves they're getting jeered. They're getting looked at sideways down at the supermarket. Their kids are getting picked on at school. Racism and kind of trying to weaponise this anti-China stuff all the way through to some, you can only call it racism because it is. Like some of these candidates that the Libs were preferencing and were in a political partnership with, their brand of politics means a harder life, a less pleasant experiences, difficulty. It doesn't mean anything better. It means lots of negatives for a lot of people from multicultural communities, particularly whether it's Chinese or people, that are quite obviously either they or their parents, were born in, or quite obviously Asian Victorians. So I think that was part of it too. I think that was definitely part of it. That sense of kind of intolerance and people aren't equal and people shouldn't be. That not just a failure to embrace multiculturalism, but a political partnership that is exactly the opposite to that. Go home. We're full. We don't need you. We don't value you. I reckon that might have played out a bit in the east, and not just in the east, but I think that might have been something that was a very real thing as well. You can't preference these people ahead of us, so put us last everywhere, and not have consequences, and there will be consequences. This Liberal Party have decided that their assessments and their strategy and their tactics to do well for themselves is more important than our support as a state and our political consensus for multiculturalism. That's what they have done. And I intend to make sure everybody from every multicultural community knows and understands that. Can't preference these people and then pretend you didn't, because they did. And I reckon some of those communities realised and were perhaps less inclined to support them because of it.
As one of your former press ex remarked on election night to me, you're going to hide into nothing when Matthew Guy has to keep on saying in the final week of the campaign, has to keep on reiterating to the media that they are a mainstream political party when they're getting questions about doing preference deals with a bunch of these, right
mainstream, I'm moderate, I'm ready, all this sort of stuff. And vote him out, vote him out, vote him out. Right, okay. Yeah.
The regions, since 1999, Brumby, Bracks, that generation of Labor campaigners and leaders and politicians built this red wall in the regions that got Braxy into government, it's surprisingly in 99, and then held onto it, and then you've taken the baton and your government has continued to build on that, and in fact you picked up Ripon, held Bass when it lost the Pakenham part, so basically essentially it's a regional, it's a rural
Absolutely
seat, really.
It is, yeah.
As well as a couple others. I think now Labor holds 11 regional seats across the state. Remarkable result. Talk to me about the focus that the government's had over the last 2 terms and going to the new term, the importance of the regions for Labor.
Yeah, well, look, when you walk down to Wonthaggi, when you walk into the Wonthaggi Hospital, which is stage 1's almost finished, this is in the seat of Bass, and you are in the middle of the building site, surrounded by workers, you commit to build stage 2, people vote for that because of course you will, of course they will. We're making this announcement in the almost completed stage 1. Every passenger rail line's been upgraded under our government. Schools like TAFE was smashed up so badly by our opponents, and country communities felt it, I think, worst of all. And we've got record low unemployment in regional Victoria, lowest since records are kept. Less than 3%, and a very high participation rate. That's not to say everything's rosy and everything's perfect in regional Victoria or any part of the state, but I think there was, and there remains, lots of tangible, practical, very real things that we've been able to achieve, finish, or we're in the process of delivering. And voters in regional Victoria know and understand that you need a government that's got a plan and a government that's got some urgency. And if you invest and you get things done, then regional Victoria does well. You also need a government that has that kind of culture of knowing, and maybe it's having grown up in country Victoria, I just know this to be true. If the regions are doing well, the rest of the state does well. And those communities, it's not that they necessarily go in to vote thinking about Jeff Kennett and people like that, but they know what a government that doesn't look after them looks like and feels like. That's not our government. Again, we're not perfect, but we're in there having a go. We're doing things. Is there more that has to be done? Yeah, of course. But I think authenticity matters, and some would say that it matters more in regional communities. And we're not promising the world, but when we make a promise, we get on and keep it, and we do our very, very best. And regional Victoria is very, very important to us. Very.
Leading up to the election, there's some were suggesting that Labor would lose seats to the independents or even possibly the Liberals in the western and northern suburbs of Melbourne. That didn't obviously eventuate, but there obviously were swings against Labor on their primary. I just want to get a sense from you with your campaign hat, what your reflections are on that, and what do you want to do in the next term to reach out to those communities and address the concerns that they may have?
Yeah, look, I think the 1 in 100 year pandemic event was felt differently, was experienced differently, had impacts that were varied, depending on what you do for a living and to a certain extent where you live. We have to acknowledge that. We also have to acknowledge and do whatever we can to deal with a sense of concern amongst some people in some parts of our state that they're not getting the support that they need, that there's something missing, that there's a gap there that needs to be filled. They're under pressure, and despite the fact that they're working really hard, despite the fact that they love their family and they're doing their level best in every way, there's this pressure and challenge and stress in their life. Now, at the same time, I don't think those communities expect miracles from us, and they know the difference between state and federal government. They know that I can't control interest rates, just as I can't control the price of, what lettuce costs at the supermarket. But at the same time, they want a better road network. They want better public transport. They want services and the sort of facilities that are really important to them. They don't want to have bought into a housing estate and then have to wait 20 years for that to become a community. They want the stuff they see other parts of the city and state have. So whether it's about reconnecting, I wouldn't describe it necessarily that way. I think we just have to, work harder to make sure people know what we are doing. We have to listen. We always have to try and work harder at listening better, and we have to make some further investments and make sure that we get, for instance, the development community to invest more, that we get councils to be delivering better services as well. There's a whole lot of parts to this. I think it's wrong to do big sweeping conclusions, but at the same time, there's not one message. There's a series of messages in every poll, and I think there's some work for us to do there, and we'll absolutely do it. And it starts with local members working as hard as they can, all the way through to parliamentary secretaries and ministers, and all the way through to me. Like, we've all got to work harder to make sure that those communities know what we're doing, that we're listening and hearing what they want and need, and then doing our level best to make sure that happens.
Then, broadly speaking, we've turned the bells are rung, and we've had Hogmanay, and we're in a new year. What does 2023 look like for a new Andrews Labor government? What's the focus? Where's the energy going to be put into in this first year of this next 4-year term?
Well, budget will be all about delivering our election promises. As many of those as we can in the first budget, or at least making a start on all of them. Not everything's fully funded in the first budget, but all the election commitments have to be ticked off. Fast start's really important, and whilst we're having that's a little bit quieter time now, we work pretty hard right up until Christmas just to get all those wheels in motion and make that fast start. There's a few budget challenges as well, obviously. We've had to go and borrow money during this 1 in 100 year pandemic event for the very best of reasons. So we've got to make sure that public money's going on those priorities that Victorians voted for, and we've got to be as focused as we can be to deliver better hospitals, better schools, all that other agenda that we laid out, completing that journey on building a new mental health system, family violence reform. I think standing up the SEC, we've already made some announcements about an interim advisory committee. We've got a CEO in there. A lot of work's already gone into that, a lot of work. And we'll have some exciting announcements to make over the first half and certainly into the second half of the year about the SEC and what that means for households and businesses, and what it means for the planet in terms of emissions, and we will deliver that agenda in full, be no doubt about that. And we may go further, which I think is a really exciting thing. People are sick and tired of not being able to tell their kids what we're doing about climate change. People are sick and tired of, they use the same amount of power, but the bills just keep going up and up and up. They're sick and tired of things that should be a basic, fundamental, staple, I can't live without this. That should not be about profit. It should be about people. As well as supporting our nurses and AMBOs and the whole team in the health system. You'll see significant investments there because there's still pressure there. There's still quite a lot of pressure. You see a big reform agenda, I think, around health with the with the new federal government. I think I try not to speak on behalf of other First Minister colleagues. They can speak for themselves, but I think there'll be a real sense of purpose around that National Cabinet table to put a very united front to the Commonwealth. They've got to do better in Medicare, because when you can't find a bulk billing doctor, and it's never been harder, particularly after hours, only place to go is to the emergency department, and that puts pressure on our hospitals. And no one wants to be at the emergency department. They want to be able to get the care they need, free, fast and local. No one wants to be at the ED unless they have to be. It's a stressful place. And they know that they're going to have to wait because the sickest have to be treated quickest. You'll see us continue to roll out skills and TAFE. We'll keep building that system up. And then there's a whole lot of small commitments. And they may not have a kind of presence or an identity across the state, but they matter in the smaller communities and at a very local level. So that kind of micro effort all the way through to big things, big picture things like standing up the SEC. It's going to be a very busy year, very, very busy year, as it should be. Every one of our years has been busy. They've all been different, but let's hope that some of the things through no one's fault and not by choice that have dominated our politics and public policy and public administration in recent years. Hopefully we're kind of unburdened by them a bit, and we can have a period of time at least where it's kind of politics that much more closely resembles normality. We don't need any more 1 in 100 year events thrown at us.
There was a lot of...
I should say.
Yeah.
And then it's also, I think there's a precious opportunity to follow up on some issues that we went to in more detail than probably any political party has ever done. So the big women's health package that came from sitting down and listening to women, believing them, and not just listening, but like hearing, actually understanding that there's massive gaps in that system. You'll see us make a fast start on that too, because when people have trusted you and have given their time and have told deeply personal stories, you need to be as respectful of that as you can be. So develop good policy and then get cracking in terms of actually delivering it. So that's a very big agenda. In a similar vein, children with disability, a massive package to be delivered there in our special schools. So we won't waste any time on that either, because again, those parents sat down with us and were very, very generous. It's the best policy development when you actually listen to people. They know that world better than anyone else. So involving them in making them, embedding them in your policy development process. Turns out people vote for stuff they help write. They vote for plans they get to be part of.
Labor caucus coming into the new parliament for this new term, we're seeing a number of new MPs come in, and obviously there's been some generational change.
Obviously, this is my 6th term, and so I've been in lots of different caucuses over the journey. It's a fantastic group. A lot of young people, a lot of new people, so many women. It's just terrific. Like we're not just at the cabinet level, where the clear majority of the cabinet are women, but it's a more diverse caucus. We've got more to do there though. We've all got to be focused, I think, on not just in terms of in our parliament, but across the board, whether it's courts and tribunals and hospitals and all sorts of other boards and governance structures. We've done really well in terms of gender parity. That's not fixed or settled, but there's still more to do there. But being more reflective of the diversity in our state is a real priority for us too over these next 4 years, and that does include the caucus. I think it's getting better, but the parliament has a way to go to look more like the community that centred there. So, and that you work for, kind of makes the point. There's always more to be done.
To that point, David Fenny has said on the podcast before that he thinks that the way that we do pre-select candidates, if we do pre-select good candidates, we're fluking it. The structures that are in place don't lend itself to ensure that we are finding good candidates. The only one he said was that when we decided to actually introduce quotas for women, that was where we brought in structural change to ensure that we elevated and gave a clear pathway for women into public leadership for the party. Do we need to start to do that in other areas as well, to your point about diversity, beyond just gender, in other ways in which we want to make sure that the Labor Party presents a diverse caucus to the Parliament?
So, sorry, what's the question? Is it David's? You want to comment on David's contention, or?
Well, if you want, I mean, first of all, so his contention is that we're fluking good candidates, because
I wouldn't. I've got a lot of time for David. I always have, but I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think candidates matter more than they ever have. I think that kind of despite the fact that technology is such a absolutely ubiquitous part, like a central part of an unconsciously central part of our lives, old-fashioned stuff matters too, like phone calls, door knocking, street stalls, like face-to-face, direct voter contact. Actually, volunteer X tells constituent Y, I'm voting Labor for the following reasons, and I think you should too. And that helps that voter find actually discover the reasons why they should be supporting our plan. There's nothing high-tech about that. It's old-fashioned stump politics, authentic, real human interaction. So we've got more in the lower house than we had before the election. Candidates and how hard they work and how authentic they are and how much they engage with the communities never mattered more. But we're fluking good candidates. No, that doesn't work. That doesn't work to me. That doesn't sort of add up. And it's a very subjective thing. It's a very qualitative thing, Like,
I think you talk about the pre-selection process of candidates that we're fluking getting the good ones.
Well, this was an interesting round because we didn't have that grassroots democratic process because we'd obviously had to have national intervention to fix the branch. We couldn't have had voting off voters' rolls that no one could have confidence in. As to the authenticity and the legitimacy of so many people who had been in the party for quite some time, and some obviously arrived much more recently. We'll get back to that. And I think that it's incumbent on any political party, particularly if you're a party of government and you want not just to beat your opponent but to win the prize, to work hard for other people, to actually deliver an agenda. It's incumbent on all the different groups that make up that party to be focused on quality, to be focused on talent, to be focused on, people who can win their seats, people who can make contributions in lots of different ways. And it's a team, and like any sporting team, not everybody's the full forward, not everyone's in the ruck, not everyone wins the best and fairest. You need a team, you need a mix of skills, you need balance, and there are different roles to play and different strengths that people bring. But I've got to tell you, I'm really happy. Like the breadth of life experience and more diversity than I've seen. Is it enough? Well, of course not. We should always strive for more of that. To be representative not just of the people who vote for us, but to be representative of the broader community. I think that's all. That's always about growth. That's about reaching into new groups of people, new communities, new blocks, if you want. Try not to think in those terms, but you know what I mean. Like you're reaching out to bigger numbers of people. That's a positive and a hopeful way of doing it. But
it's good for democracy.
It is absolutely. It's absolutely because you don't want people because they can't see it or see someone who looks like them and speaks like them or goes to the same temple or mosque or synagogue as them. You don't want people thinking that they're not included, they're not valued, they're not part of the whole show. So being representative it's good for us as a party, good for us as a government, good for the parliament, good for the state. And that's why, I can't work out why our political opponents, having looked and seen what quotas have meant for us, why you wouldn't just say, well, we think that there are some structural institutional biases here and we're going to do something about it. I just can't understand. I cannot get it.
They're regressing. They're getting wider and more blokier.
Well, look, you've had this kind of case study, this massive clinical trial, and it's worked pretty well, hasn't it? Like, literally, more than half the cabinet are women. Half the caucus are women. How you can't sort of just see that and say, well, maybe there's something to these quotas. Maybe getting our internal processes right is really important. I don't know why that's not obvious to them.
Last question.
Yes.
When I think about the three elections that Labor has now won in Victoria under your leadership, and I was involved in a campaign sense in two of them. 2014 for me personally was the first time we rolled out the sort of the community action network. So I kind of felt like it was high stakes for me, because I thought if we lose, I was probably going to lose my job. So on election night when we won, it was, I guess my feeling was relief. 2018.
Well, I was in a very marginal seat, mate. So if we'd lost, I was probably going to lose my job too. There you go.
Well, we're in it together, weren't we? Literally. 2018, I actually felt like it was a well-oiled machine, that campaign. So I just enjoyed the whole experience. 2022, I wasn't involved, so I was looking at it from the outside. I want to get a sense what 2022 meant to you in terms of campaign and election night and the result.
What it felt like. I think there was probably more pressure. We had to be flawless. Kath and I get on the bus, go off, do media events. Any little thing that went wrong was going to be all over the news. Even though it had no relevance whatsoever to what you were announcing or the contest. There was a kind of superficiality to the whole thing in some ways. Like it had to be flawless. And to a certain extent, we just one day at a time, one event at a time, one day at a time. That's the only way you can do campaigns. And, we avoided any major gaffes and, had really good policy, and we worked hard to get it out there and explained it in not simple terms, but in just practical common sense terms. Still talking up to people about, what some of these things would mean and, painting a picture. It was a campaign of hard work, a campaign of detail, campaign of policy. From our point of view, like a lot of hard work went into the ideas, the good ideas that we put out there. Not just policies. It sometimes has a kind of connotation of 800-page books that no one ever reads. And the head office team and my office team were very closely aligned. They worked very closely together. Candidates worked extremely hard. Ministers, the whole team. It was a good, solid campaign, and we got what had to be done. And we weren't knocked off course. We also weren't kind of overtaken by the loudest voices. We weren't overtaken or too sort of knocked off course by those who were cheerleading for the other side, when it's just not their job and it's not healthy for them to be doing that. We had a plan, we had good ideas, we had a lot of hard work, and we just executed, and that's what's really, really important. And you've got to have there's a degree of self-confidence in that. Like, you've just got to be, this is our plan, this is our strategy, these are the tactics we'll employ to deliver that strategy, and we're just going to work as hard as we can. We'll take nothing for granted. And be able to look at each other at 6 o'clock on the 26th of November, and it's either there or it's not. There's nothing else we could have done, and I think that's exactly where we got to, and we're so pleased and privileged and humbled and grateful that people have not just helped us beat our opponents. That's not what it's about. People have given to us this precious thing, this amazing gift, the opportunity and the obligation to keep working hard for them. And that's exactly what we'll do.
And on that note, Premier, as always, thanks for coming on the show. And I know our dedicated listeners will have enjoyed this quality hour and probably a little bit more. With your
quality rambling from me. It's great. Thank you so much.
As always. And obviously, congratulations on a fantastic result in November last year. I certainly think the Labor community needed it, and we want to wish you and your government the best of success for the coming term. And on a personal note, I hope you and your family get a well-earned break over the summer.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Socially Democratic. Did you like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button, and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser. And to get all the latest on Socially Democratic, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn. And we'll see you next Friday. Socially Democratic was brought to you by SwiftFox. Every moment on a campaign matters. You need the tools that you can trust, lists that are up to date, phone banks that can change minds, emails that drive donations, events that will energise the community online and offline, and text blasts that distill your message perfectly. SwiftFox CRM is made for campaigners by campaigners. To find out more, go to swiftfoxcrm.com to win your next campaign. Socially Democratic was brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn Lawyers have spent more than a century paving the hard path to justice for everyday Australians. They've helped over 500,000 Australians turn their situation around, and they know how the system works. Their experience and skills means you'll get the best results possible. Find out more on their website, mauriceblackburn.com.au. Maurice Blackburn, experience you can count on.